Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
Number one, you got to have this deep desire. And number two is you got to be trustworthy. If you have to do what you say you're going to do, you have to be totally honest. Otherwise, your suppliers or your customers or your employees or whoever you work with really won't want to work with you.
Hello and welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Today we're speaking with Andy Wells, who is the owner and CEO of Wells Technology, a manufacturing company in Minnesota. Andy has degrees in physics and technology, as well as decades of practical experience in design, materials, processes, and entrepreneurship. Over the years, Wells Tech has grown from serving the aerospace industry to automotive, medical, defense, food processing, and developed services in distribution and training for manufacturing technologists. Andy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's an honor to be here.
Well, Andy, what made you decide to enter this field of engineering and manufacturing?
Well, I was kind of born into it, growing up on a very poverty-stricken farm on an Indian reservation. And we had a lot of old machinery there as my dad started farming. Just being a little kid, I hung around with him at first, learning how to use tools, and then starting to take things apart, the old clocks and stuff like that kids could get hold of sometimes. And it just kind of developed. And as I got a little older, I had the responsibility of running tractors, fixing things. So I kind of learned it just that way, but I was also very curious. And I think it kind of irritated my parents a little bit because I took things apart, wanted to know how things would work. I still do a lot of that, curious about electronics and chemistry and mechanical things. So because of the curiosity and because of my imaginative, creative nature, I come up with a lot of little products, even when I was quite young, that helped our farming operation, sometimes just toys. So because like I mentioned, we're living on a pretty tight budget in our family, the toys were more clothing items and not so much actually toys when a birthday party or Christmas party came along. So a lot of the toys we had at first were just little blocks of wood and some of the simple things. So gradually, when I had more ability, I started building go-karts and motor scooters and boats and other mechanical things. So I kind of grew up being sort of a junior, non-formal engineer, but it was the beginning steps to what led to my career.
Now, that's wonderful. You mentioned the word creativity, which I hear a lot from really good engineers. It's just something that they have innately. Do you think that creativity, is that something that can be developed in a person, or you either have it or you don't?
Well, I think most people have it, and you see it in little children until they're about young teenagers. It kind of, I think, from peer pressure and maybe just other interests, they kind of move on to more traditional things. But when they're young, most children are very creative, playing with boxes and so forth. Unfortunately, nowadays, the toy industry has made toys look so realistic. Oftentimes, people don't need creativity as much, but still, just creativeness is probably in most people. I just found it to be so interesting that I just kept it going. And even to this day, I'm creating things and puzzles, always trying to keep the mind fresh that way.
Yeah. When you were growing up, especially when you were younger, maybe, I don't know, younger than in your teens, is there anything you can remember inventing or designing that turned out to be a really great tool or very beneficial to your family, and you thought to yourself, I'm actually really good at this. Like, I could keep doing this for a long, long time.
Well, I was quite young. I noticed that, there are certain screws that were Phillips heads and others were slotted head. And so we had to have two screwdrivers. So I had made a screwdriver that actually using an old rifle cartridge and took two screwdrivers apart and built this one that you could slip the end of it. I still have it here in my display case, one of my early inventions. I was about 7 years old at the time. And, of course, now you see them all over at hardware stores at homes where you pull the shake out and you turn it end for end, put it back in the handle. But that was one of my earliest inventions that probably, if we had known what to do with it, might have become a commercial product back then. But, you learn all that, too. Inventing is one thing, but manufacturing and marketing and all that is the other part.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going through that right now here at my company, Pipeline. We have just finished developing one or two different products of our own, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we sell these things now? That's a whole other ball game. Let's see. Growing up on a farm, you designed, all sorts of things, right? Go-karts and homemade rockets and double-sided screwdrivers. At some point, you realized that a formal education would help you take your capabilities to the next level in terms of turning your concepts into reality. What were a few of the limitations that you encountered designing things back then? And then how did your college education help you overcome those limitations?
Well, I was actually in my late teens, just turning 20 when I left the farm and found an industrial job at a nearby factory that made snowmobiles called Polaris Industries up here in northern Minnesota. And I happened to be aware of them because they also made straw choppers that went on the back of combines. We had an old combine that had one of those. So I saw the address and the company name, and we had a poor crop year that year. It wasn't much money. So my dad and I talked it over, and I said, well, rather than staying on the farm, I think maybe I'll see if I can get an industrial job. And went up to Polaris, and I brought along a lot of pictures of all the different toys. I guess I'll call them, like you said, go-karts and all that stuff. And showed it to the president. They had only 300 employees back then, but the president had been involved in making the very first snowmobile here in America, and he was quite a creative person himself, and he was, really interested, I think, and saw something in me that he really probably felt within himself also, the creativeness. So he was about 35 years old. Here I was 20 years old. And so he said, well, we'll hire you as an apprentice, and you can work in the engineering department and do drawings, and let's see what happens. So after a couple of weeks, I asked if I could make a new snowmobile design. I'd been making sketches of one that would actually have the motor in the front, because back then the motors were in the back, and they were big and they were heavy. And so I made a small one of my design that would be fast and fun and lightweight. And he said that they were short on money, so I'd have to, probably couldn't do that. But I offered to pay for all the materials if I could use their shop at night when there was no normal production going on. And so with that in mind, I volunteered to work. And after about 3 to 4 months, I had built up the prototype of that first front engine snowmobile for Polaris. And he and, of course, all the other employees were interested. And when I was testing it, the little kids in the neighborhood really enjoyed it because it was one that fit their size. Me being a smaller person, it was just naturally a little bit on the smaller size. So they loved it. And the president saw that had a lot of potential. So he invited me out for lunch with at his home, actually. I met his wife there, and we sat and had a relaxed noon lunch. And he said, I should go back to school. And he said he had wished he had done that when he was younger. And he said, now is my chance. And he said, I could always come back and work at Polaris. But he said, go get some science and math and, try and, learn the kind of technology and things that will help you in the future. And he just gave me his friendly advice. So I took it to heart, and a couple of days later, I told them I was going to do that. So I resigned and started pursuing my college education. And actually, it was very good advice. I'm glad I did it. Of course, I learned a lot, just with the sciences, the maths, the chemistry, the calculus, is all the things you take to be, a graduate diploma engineer or scientist or whatever you want to call that. I use, of course, a lot of it. You never know what you're going to use when you're going through all those classes. It's sort of a shotgun approach. They give you all these things, and then hopefully some of them will come in useful, and they did. And the second thing that really helped was when I got into discussions as a consultant with at big corporations with engineers. They often would, talk about certain things, and I would give my opinion, they'd give theirs, and we always did it in a professional way. But sometimes they would say, well, are you an engineer? How do you know all this? And I tell them, no, I'm not a degreed engineer, but I do have a master's degree in physics. And, that held a lot of weight because it's a lot of similar classes we had to take. It's just that in the community I lived in, there wasn't a school that offered engineering. And that's one of the handicaps that sometimes you have when you grow up in a poverty area, a rural area. It's quite an intimidating thing to go to a big city. And I wanted to stay in a small school, so I went to our local four-year university. And by the time I finished my physics degree, they had actually put in a master's program. So I got the 5-year master's program then. But I'm thankful it was a small school. It was easy to get a lot of help. And we had a lot of fun. I ended up, there too, probably taking longer than I should have because I had to work my way through. I had to have a job too to pay for the school. But eventually got done, and I'm thankful I did do that.
What were a few of the things that you learned at university that did end up being really helpful in your career?
Well, I think a lot of the formulas, for pressure, temperature, volume, some of those basic things. I don't remember all of them exactly. Of course, you got mass energy and all those things, but I know they exist. And all I have to do is get on the internet and look up, what I want to know. And there the formula is, so I know how to use it once I see it. It's just being aware of all these different things, and sometimes processes. And meeting other people, being around other, engineering, science type people. It was good to have that kind of camaraderie to kind of encourage each other. And sometimes I guess I did get in a little bit of trouble too, because ended up building things I probably shouldn't have, but, I was a student helper too there, so I had access to a lab, and I knew how to use tools, and I encouraged them to put in a machine shop. So they got a grant, and they let me buy all the equipment for that machine shop, and so I had free access to build things. In one case, one of the chemistry guys was talking about rocket powder, and I said, well, I can build rockets. I know how to do that. And they kind of challenged me and said, well, let's build one. So I built the rocket, and he furnished the powder, and I explained how to mix it with the ratios and all of that, and we launched it. And of course, the school didn't like that. It was sort of an unapproved launch off the top of the science building, but it went it went a mile or two out and across the lake and landed and stuck. Fortunately, it was, nobody got hurt or anything, but they didn't want me doing that again.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Well, following your time at university, you went on to work in academia and as an industrial consultant for about 20 years or so, if I have the numbers right. Then sometime in the second half of the 80s, I believe you founded Wells Technology, originally an aerospace manufacturing business. Starting a business can be a scary proposition. I know that from experience. What are some things that you did in the beginning of Wells Tech to reduce risk to you and the company?
Well, it's a big step going from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. It's in many ways. One is it takes a lot of time. You have to be really devoted. You just got to have a deep, deep desire to do that, to be your own boss, because it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice from your family as much as from yourself. They have to realize that you're not going to be there a lot of times for birthday parties and for little family things that they sometimes, used to have you around for. You're going to be working often late, maybe traveling, and you're going to have a lot of things on your mind. So my family, had to understand that, and they did. My wife was a great supporter all the way through. She believed that I could do it. And when I resigned, I was a university professor. And when I resigned, people said, "You're crazy. You got a 10-year job. It's a great job." And it was. And I worked 4 days a week, and I had Friday off to do consulting for large corporations. And it was great. But there was something inside, that just felt I needed to have my own business. And I believed I could do it. And I was willing to learn from every experience I had. I didn't know all the answers, but I was willing to try and try and try until I found them. And we did make a lot of mistakes, but we made a lot of things that went right too, and built upon those. And I was fortunate. My 12-year-old son was interested also in this, and he began to follow along with what I was doing and help me in many ways. So we had $1,300 when we started. Because teachers, don't make a whole lot of money, but I was a teacher because I believed in sharing things with people, sharing knowledge and experiences and things. So I enjoyed teaching. But it was time now to teach my son, and so I would get him involved. We both learned at the same time, and we built up our company from that $1,300. It took us a while to find a product. We bought an old milling machine, and I tried different products. I tried a lung-shaped ashtray. I tried little snaps that go on your shoes so you don't have to tie the laces. I still wear them. And all kinds of little things. And finally, we came up, I read in the paper that people in the chicken industry were getting carpal tunnel and having sore hands from using scissors. So I went to work designing and building air-powered scissors and then air-powered knives. And those things really caught on. They really started selling. And so we borrowed a lot of money to, much as we could, to get patents on those. And I did the first patent myself because I didn't have money for it. But later on, I showed it to a lawyer, and he said, you really need to get help. He said, patents are so specialized that instead of spending all your time trying to learn that, it's kind of like doing your own income taxes. When you're in business, you're better off spending your time creating new products and let us do the patents, he said. And so we worked out that arrangement. And it turned out to be a great product. Those scissors we still sold, we still manufacture them. And you need, eventually you need something like that when you're an entrepreneur to kind of really get you going. Otherwise you struggle and struggle. And eventually, if you can hang on financially, it just wears you down mentally from all the stress. But after about 8 or 9 months, we began selling our products, and we began having some positive cash flow. That's where, having grown up in a poverty family, both my wife and I did, we knew how to live very frugal. And so we made it through okay. And it's interestingly enough, our life has never really changed. We still live that way pretty much. You kind of grow up a certain way, and I just still like that. I don't stay in the most expensive hotels, even if I could afford them. You just kind of get a certain way of life, even when you have success. So I appreciate having been in poverty when I was young, because I really now, I'm thankful for being able to go to a nice restaurant if I want, or to have a nice office, or to travel if you want to. It gives you a real appreciation when you've come from poverty. It's sort of like if you've had a lot of rain, you appreciate the sunshine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so the business took off, and we kept adding more ideas and more things. And the one thing that's really, two things maybe that are really critical for an entrepreneur or a person wanting to start is, number one, you got to have this deep desire. And number two is you got to be trustworthy. If you have to do what you say you're going to do, you have to be totally honest. Otherwise, your suppliers or your customers or your employees or whoever you work with really won't want to work with you. And it takes a while. Marketing is very difficult. So you have to be willing to struggle for a while. And it can take 10 years to get your foot in the door, and sometimes at a big company. And the reason is there's so many people trying. And oftentimes big companies look at a little company and say, well, we don't want to add more little companies because now we got more addresses, we got more purchasing challenges. We'd rather have the companies that exist expand their product line. So it takes a while to get your foot in the door. But if you keep trying and keep trying, quite often you can succeed. And it actually works in reverse. When I have employees come here, I had one young fellow come last summer. He was about 17 years old. He was a junior in high school. And he kept showing up every morning at my place, and he wanted a job. And he didn't have any skills yet, industrial skills or training. So at first I said, well, not right now. We don't need anything. And the next day he'd show up again and show up again. And finally I said, can you run a lawnmower? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I got a lawnmower here. It's a riding lawnmower, and I'll show you a little bit about it. If you want to give it a try, let's see how it goes. He did fantastic. He loved it, good attitude. And that's where perseverance, whether you're an employee or you're an entrepreneur, you just got to keep trying. And in a pleasant, polite and patient way. And eventually, a lot of times you can succeed.
Wow. So many wonderful nuggets of wisdom here, Andy. I almost don't even know what direction to go with all of this. With all this amazing advice that you've been giving, one question I have is specifically about a manufacturing company. For those listening who might be interested in starting their own business in manufacturing. Of course, there are a lot of general principles and pieces of advice that could be given about starting a business, but specifically starting a manufacturing business. Any pearls of wisdom that you can share?
Yep. Be willing to do sometimes things free. We've done a lot of prototypes, a lot of first models or first samples. We've done them free. And sometimes when you get known a little bit better, you can charge an engineering charge, or you can charge a prototype charge. But, we were willing to do it to prove to people that our capability and we could do things fast. There were many times in my first year when my son and I would work all weekend, and we'd take turns running the machine day and night. He'd work 12 hours and I'd work 12 hours. And we'd get our samples made up. Sometimes we had companies call us Friday afternoon, and they'd say, they got a certain part that they ran out of. They need 6 more. And the company that normally makes them is shut down for the weekend. Is there any way we could get them 6 of those parts? And I'll tell them, yeah, if you can fax me or email me a print, a drawing, I'll make those parts for you this weekend, and I'll put them on an airplane Sunday night, and you'll have it Monday morning. And so we'd have a courier pick it up on the other end and deliver it at 8 o'clock in the morning to the customer. And we do this many, many times. And sometimes my son or I would drive ourselves, 400 or 500 miles to deliver a part or a box of parts. And we just went extraordinary distances in terms of helping customers to earn a reputation. And even today, when we make, let's say we're making 1,000 parts of some item for a customer, I'll run maybe 15 or 20 extra, and just put them in a little inventory, and carry them for a year or two. When our machine is set up anyway, and it's running these parts maybe 1 or 2 minutes a piece, it doesn't take long to make a few extra ones, and put them in a drawer, put them away. Quite often, the company who was needing these 1,000 parts will discover that they were actually short a few. Not that we miscounted, but maybe some got damaged during installation, or maybe some got dropped and lost. Anyway, they need 3 or 4 parts more. They call us up and say, by chance, do we have any extras? I'll say, yeah, we got about 20 of them here. And they say, oh, my goodness, what would it cost us to get those? I said, I'll send them to you tomorrow, no charge. You can have them free. Just remember us the next time you need some. And this has built a lot of good customer relations through the years. So now when I go to trade shows, and of course I'm always trying to find new customers, but a lot of the old customers show up and we shake hands and they thank us for taking good care of them. And I tell them we're here when you need us, and if we can do it and we say we can do it, you can count on us. We will do it. We just do it. Follow this thing called integrity. Your word has to mean something. And if you say something, then you really need to do it so that they begin to believe in you.
Again, just so many pearls of wisdom here. Incredible advice, hard-earned, I'm sure, over all the years. I'm going to take a very short break here and share with the listeners that teampipeline.us is where you can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. Today we're speaking with Andy Wells, CEO at Wells Technology. So when you first started Wells Technology, Andy, you had this product, these pneumatic shears, and you were also doing job shop work, basically. Is that right? The combination of those two things?
Yes, that is. We started that way, and the shears were growing, and I sold the patents for those so I could get some money to buy the CNC equipment. That equipment is so expensive. We had to have, like $200,000, $300,000 to buy a machine. At first, the banks wouldn't loan us any money because we only had $1,300 for a down payment, and we were new, and they were worried that we wouldn't make it because, truthfully, a lot of businesses don't make it. The first 5 years, I think about half of them fail. So, understandably, they were a little bit concerned. But as we started selling our shares and we started building our reputation, they began to take an interest. But they weren't going to borrow us the $200,000 or $300,000. They thought, well, maybe $50,000. So I had to sell some of my patents, and fortunately, I found the buyers for them, for our tools. And we got enough money to buy our first CNC machine. And from that, our production just really increased in both quantity and quality. So it was easy to hold the tolerances that aerospace demanded. And there again, they would send us the parts when they were in trouble and couldn't get things quickly. That's when we would get, discovered. And I would go to trade shows, and I think that's really important because if there's one thing that new entrepreneurs often underestimate, it's probably how much work and expense that marketing is. You would have to spend a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of money, and it's hard to really know what's working. You can put an ad in a magazine or you can go to a trade show, but it's hard to really know if that's paying off. It takes a while to kind of figure out what your thing is in terms of marketing that is successful. We kept on trying all kinds of things, and eventually people would discover us. And then when they got in trouble, somebody didn't come through with the right product quantity or whatever, they would call us up because I told them to do that. I said, we're here when you need us. And so they'd call us up and I'd say, sure, we'll do this. And I'd give them an estimation of time and cost. And we never took advantage of them, and I still don't. If I had to pay overtime, I'd tell them that. I'd tell them, look, I got to keep my employees over the weekend. I'll have to pay them maybe time and a half or double time if it's a holiday. But I said, if you're willing to do that, we can do this for you. And they almost always were. But we never got carried away with extra charges. I don't like it when people do that to me, and I don't do it to other people. In fact, we go the other way. We try to be really good to our suppliers. I know a lot of them are struggling too. So I don't beat them down in cost. I tell them, give me a fair price and I'll buy these tools or these machines or whatever from you, but give me a fair price. And I said, but I'm going to pay you in 10 days. Now, a lot of places, we don't get paid in 10 days. We get paid oftentimes, it's 90 days or even 120 now. So it's a struggle if you're a little company and that's happening because you got to carry that cash flow. So you have to be able to do that because that's getting to be the trend. It used to be 30, then it was 60, and now it's getting to be 90 and 120. These companies that do this call it using other people's money, OPM. But for us little companies, it's kind of a tough when you first start out. So I don't do that to suppliers. I pay them in 10 days. And that helps. I know the business schools say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. But it helps us because when we need a favor, for example, if I'm going to one of the bigger cities to pick up metal, and I've got a truck down there and I need it right away for emergency, and this big company, this big distribution company may say, well, we got a 24-hour turnaround. We can't just take a phone call and pull metal off our racks and put it on the truck you got coming in. So I tell them, look, I'm the company that's been paying you in 10 days or less for a number of years. So we do what we can to help you. Now I'm asking you to help us. Can you do that? And almost always they'll say, okay, we'll do it for you. So
that's terrific.
So if you go out of your way to help other people, they will go out of their way to help you. And I say the same thing about a smile. You give a smile, walk down the street smiling at people, the smiles come back. It's the same with kindness and goodness and help. You give it to other people, it comes back to you. You treat people fairly, they'll treat you fairly. You be honest with people, they'll be honest with you. And I work with a lot of people here who sometimes fail in the public systems. Some of them even come out of prison. And people say, well, how do you dare do that? Or what kind of work do you get? So they get terrific work. They're excellent employees. They're great. And I've set my standards high. I tell them what I expect, but I live by those standards too. For example, we have a policy you can't use your cell phone in the shops unless it's an emergency call. I know some of them got children and so on. And I said, now, if your wife is stuck in the ditch on her way to work, that's okay. She can call you and you can go and help her up. Or your kids are sick, you got to go pick them up. That's okay. But you can't be playing games. You can't be talking with your buddies about deer hunting. I said, that's work time. You do that other stuff during coffee time. But I'm the same way. I can't do that either. You got to walk your talk. And when you're a business leader. So once a week, I go out there and I talk to our employees. I talk positive. We have a policy here that I try to catch people doing things right, not wrong. Catch them doing things right, and I like to give them a compliment. It doesn't have to be long, just less than a minute. Just tell them I appreciate what they did, and their workstation looks clean, or the floor is nice and clean. I really like that. Around is safe. Just little things. People like appreciation, and we all do. And just a few words from an entrepreneur, from the leader, the manager, supervisor, just a few words really can brighten their day. And so I try to do that, especially in the mornings when they come in. They've had kind of a tired, or they've kind of having a tough time meeting their bills and so on. But a little word of appreciation really goes a long way in helping them brighten their day. So we do that. So I'm kind of straying off of your question here. But
no, this is wonderful. Andy, I feel like I could just sit and listen to you talk all day. This is, I don't love the term masterclass because I feel like it's so cliche and overused, but I can't think of a better word to use right now than just a masterclass in empathy and business and entrepreneurship and leadership and, all of these things that we all strive for. So I really appreciate you sharing all of this with me. I do have a more of a technical question about design for manufacturing. With all of the decades of experience that you have in the world of manufacturing, maybe you can shed some light or share some strategies here. A lot of engineers, unfortunately, don't necessarily have the opportunity to gain experience in manufacturing. They've never worked on a shop floor. They've never run a mill or a lathe or a CNC machine. And because of that, they're understandably, somewhat ignorant in DFM principles, design for manufacturability. Kind of the classic example here is putting square internal corners in a part that needs to be machined on a mill, which of course is impossible because you can't cut a square internal corner with a round cutter. Are there any maybe less trivial examples that you can share of mistakes or design choices that engineers make that complicate manufacturing?
Yeah, what we see is small fillets, welding fillets. Sometimes they'll specify a really small radius on a fillet. Well, the arc welding and even gas welding, it's not always easy to do that. It can be done, but it drives the cost way up. And so a lot of the stuff that they might ask for can be done, but my question is it really necessary? Is it really needed? So my advice to engineers, if they don't know the processes, is to be humble. Don't let your ego get in the way of some good sense. Be humble, and when you call a supplier or potential supplier, say, hey, look, this is the design we're trying to achieve. Here's our beginning sketches or drafts or our beginning prints, engineering prints. If you see something on there as a supplier, would you talk with us about it, where we can save some costs and where we can do things a little bit maybe faster, easier, cheaper, better? Talk to us about that. And we come across that quite often now. We have engineers doing that with us. And, we look at things and we say, look, here's a couple of choices. If you could move the tolerance a little bit on this one, we could save you 3% on your costs. Things like that. There's just many, many little ways. So be willing to work with the people who are making your parts because they know their business just as you know your business as an engineer in your area. But, be open-minded and let them talk with you. Ask questions, because some places, if you can give a little bit on your design, they could probably save you maybe 5, maybe even 10%. And quite often we see this on tolerances. A new engineer coming fresh out of school will put a real tight tolerances thinking this is going to be a great thing. They're going to have an excellent part. Well, yeah, the part will be excellent, but it'll also be expensive. And maybe it doesn't have to be quite that excellent to perform its function. You don't need a 1,000th of an inch tolerance or a 5. A window of 5 would be fine. There are some products that just don't require close tolerances. Making wheelchairs, for example. Most parts on a wheelchair don't require 5,000ths of an inch tolerance. Your bending pipe, it could be probably plus or minus 10 or 15 thousandths. You'd be just fine. You're going to weld it on, handle somewhere, or maybe a little break on the wheel somewhere. If you got bearings and shafts, that's a little different, especially if you got things like valve lifters where you got, male and female parts. We make those things sure to just a few millionths of an inch tolerance between the male and female. It can be done, but I'll tell you, it's expensive when you get into that kind of thing. So as a new engineer designing something, work with your people who are going to actually produce it. And don't just throw the product over the fence, as we used to say, into the production area and expect them to come back with what you want at a good price, because you'll probably get something back, but it could be less costly if you work with them. And we do that a lot. In fact, we have several customers who start making prototypes, and I can see where they're going with their design, what they want to achieve, and after 1 or 2 efforts, I'll sometimes make a 3rd or 4th prototype ahead of time for them, but I'm very careful with how I present it to them. I'll say, well, I've seen what your first one looked like and your second one, and logically, this might be something you'd want to consider. Just look at it with an open mind, throw it away if you don't like it. But see if it is something along the line of your thinking. And because I really want them to have their fingerprints. It's their project. I don't want to take away any of the glory that goes with designing of it. But if I could help with some little idea that takes them a little further, I'm glad to share it in a humble way with them. So, so we not only make parts, but we try to help design part too. And we're really a team. This whole group of people from the suppliers, the manufacturer, the designers, the assembly people, the sales, marketing people. It's all of us together. And actually, we get a lot of good ideas from the marketing people. They tell us what customers say. And often it doesn't end with just marketing. You got the service afterwards, and sometimes the lawsuits. The lawsuits are going to follow if you haven't made your product properly or designed it properly. And then you got to deal with that in court, which is very expensive. And so you have to be kind of really careful. And of course, there is that final step of disposing of it. Now, things like solar panels, batteries, they're going to have to deal with all of that coming up in the future. So, so your product is going to follow you for a while. So there's a lot to this design thing.
I'd love to go back to the topic of tolerances really quickly, because that's actually a conversation that we had internally here at Pipeline. There was some debate about what level of default tolerance is not going to drive the cost up. And just to build some context around this, let's assume that we're talking about a CNC part. So we're probably milling this thing, and it's maybe 6 or 7 inch long part, or up to, it's not a really, really big part, small to medium sized part. We've used plus or minus 0.005 of an inch as our default title block tolerance in our drawings for a long time. And one of our project leads here suggested that, maybe we can go a little tighter than that without increasing cost. What would you say is kind of like the default tolerance that's not going to increase cost?
I would say it depends on the level of your machines and your skill of your operators. When we first started out, even 10 years ago, going from a 5 tolerance, plus or minus, to a plus or minus, let's say 2, would probably have increased the cost maybe 8 or 10%, because it would have been a little bit of a stretch for our machines and same with our employees. But in the past 10 years, we, and of course a lot of other companies, have bought new equipment, much higher precision equipment. People have now got 10 years more experience. So holding a 2000s is just normal daily operation. Now it's easy. And if you said you're going to change it from 5 to a 2 for us, say, well, it wouldn't make any difference to us. We're going to run it at probably 1 anyway, 1 plus or minus 1, because our machines are capable of it. An operator would have to be really sort of neglecting his tooling to let it wear so much that it would get beyond 2 or 3 thousandths. We use a lot of what I call them histograms, where we plot the wear on tools frequently, and we can see when they start to wear and need correction, or I won't say sharpening, but replacement. But now, actually, the challenge for us isn't at that level. It's more, we do probably 30 or 40% of our work in 1/10 thousandth. With a window of 1 plus or minus 1/10 thousandth. We can go down to 10 millionths of an inch, plus or minus 10 millionths. But the cost there is much higher, of course. But 1/10, you'd probably, if you went from 1,000 to 1/10, you'd probably double the price, something of that order. Yeah. And there are some parts that require it. If you're getting into really tight valves, like hydraulic valves and so forth. But right away, we talk with our customers and, the designer and say, what are you trying to do here? What's practical? And they're almost always concerned about price too. And we tell them, here's what we can do for you. And if still price is a concern, I say, well, okay, let's talk about quantity then. Can we increase the quantity and keep the price down for you? So we're always trying to work with quality, price, delivery. And the fourth thing, of course, is just being friendly, just being easy to work with. Because I don't care what the price and quality and delivery are. If you got a really miserable person on the other end of the phone, as your supplier, you just don't want to work with them if you don't have to. So if you got someone who's really pleasant, nice, and understanding, and that goes a long way too, along with all the other things you expect from a supplier.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. But by, let's see, early 2000s, 2004 or so, Wells Technology had grown to more than just manufacturing, and you had, enjoyed some measure of pretty good success with your business by then, and decided it was time to give back. And at that time, you started a social engineering project to train some folks, and you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, who needed, call it a second chance in life. Can you tell us a little bit about that program and how it's grown over the years?
Yeah, it kind of began to evolve as we were growing. We needed operators, engineering people here, technicians, so forth. They're very hard to find up in this part of our country because we're pretty remote. And I think a lot of the younger people, especially who want to go to trade schools and universities, they tend to go to the bigger cities. So up here in this remote part, we don't have much opportunity to hire those people. What we do have coming to our door is a lot of people who probably, like I said, need a second chance. They've dropped out of high school. Our high school failure rate in this community is very high. It's well over 50%, because we have a lot of people who grow up in poverty families, and sometimes there's a lot of dysfunction. The kids don't get the support they need, so they don't, do their homework. They don't even want to attend school, and they struggle. And they come to us later in their life, wondering if they could find a job. And, I used to say, no, sorry, especially those that had felonies, because they had to check on their application. And like a lot of places, even all over America, I think you find everything from fast food to industry and government. And people don't want to hire those who've had a felony. And some of these young folks, especially, get a felony for things that, it really end up ruining their life. Maybe got caught with some drugs, or maybe they stole a car or something because they were just hanging out. They dropped out of school, didn't know what to do, or did they have the right supervision maybe when they were young? I can't say I really blame the young people, because they kind of are what we as adults have led them to be in the environment we put them in. They, of course, have their own personal talents and their personal motivation, but a lot of what they are is the result of what we have exposed them to. And so if they haven't had proper training and so forth when they were young and disciplined, they can do things that end up causing them to get a felony. That it's, I'm not saying that they threatened anybody's life, but they did something that broke the law. And now they got this hanging over their head, and people don't want to hire them. And they came here, and I thought, one day when one fellow came in, I said, well, I'm sorry. He was so pleasant. And he shook hands with me, and he said, I've been trying for 6 months. He said, I just can't find anything. And he shook hands, and he thanked me for talking with him, and he went out the door. And when he went back to his car, I looked out there, and I could see a lady, and I could see 2 little kids in there. And I thought, how would I feel going back to my family? When I made a mistake, and I'm trying to correct it, but somebody won't give me a second chance. So I went outside. He had just gotten in his car, and I just tapped on the roof a little bit. He opened his window. And I said, will you come back on Monday? And I'd like to take you out in the shop and walk around and see if you think this is the kind of work you'd like to do. Well, of course, he smiled, and his lady, I don't know if it was his wife or girlfriend, but anyway, she was smiling. They were happy. Finally, they had a chance. Well, he did come back, and he spent several years with us. And I found out that, I used to teach some of the best and brightest at the university, but I could teach these folks too. These people are smart. It's just that they had made a mistake. All they needed was a second chance, somebody to help them. And so I started teaching them how to do the things we do in the shop, everything from sweeping the floors to running the machines and setting them up with tooling, and even getting into the programming by about the 3rd or 4th year of writing the CNC programs. And these folks are very capable of learning that. And they were so loyal because they appreciated so much that somebody finally had helped them. And one time I had a company, a representative from a big company come here, and I mentioned to them that I said, well, some of these folks, they've had to had little bad experiences in their life, but they're doing just great. And he said, you mean you hire them when they've had a felony? And I said, yeah, I do. I do mean that. And he says, he kind of looked at me and I said, well, where would you rather meet them? Would you rather meet them here? When they're in training and they got a job and they got an income and they're appreciated and they're part of the team for production? Or would you rather meet them out on the street where nobody will give them a chance and they got nothing except to steal or sell drugs or do something like that? Where would you rather meet them? And the guy kind of smiled. He shook my hand. He thanked me.
It's kind of hard to argue with that logic, isn't it?
It got us started. And so far we've helped 105. And actually we got 2 more coming out in about 2 weeks out of our program. Now, we went one step further because a lot of the folks had transportation problems. They had lost their driver's license. They didn't have any money for a car. And I had a couple of them who couldn't even read an instruction manual to get a driver's license. They were like 21, 22 years old. So we decided to take our program right into a poverty area. And so we loaded up about $1 million worth of equipment, production equipment, and moved it into a poverty area. I worked with the leaders of that area to make sure it would be okay with them. And they found a warehouse that was insulated. It was a newer one, so it was fairly modern. They had the lights in the water and so forth. And we put our equipment in there, and we started advertising. Well, we had all kinds of people show up. And I offered to pay them, $15 an hour minimum wage to take training. So they had something to live on. And so a lot of them were so close they could walk to our training center. And we put one of the teachers in, one of our best employees to be a teacher who had come from that area. So he knew the culture, he knew the people, and, they would feel comfortable with him. So we ran this program for 6 months, and it was very successful. And those people, after 6 months, they came to our main factory, and they began here as apprentices. And we kept moving them up, challenging them, increasing their pay a little bit at a time as they progressed. And we've got quite a few. I think now our population is around 32 or 33% of our employees came from that type of a background, and they're doing very well. They're very loyal. They're very good. I got one lady out here. I just talked to her maybe an hour or two ago. She's running our most complex machine. It's a brand new one. We paid $400,000 for it. It just came in about a month ago. And here she is setting it up and running one of the first parts we run on it. And she came out of this kind of a background. Very smart. Just needed someone to help her out. And she's supporting 5 children with money that she earns from us. And so now we're going to send her. I told her this afternoon, I said, I was invited to go to a big corporation to get an award. I said, I'm going to have you travel, and I'm going to send you along with our lady who's a quality assurance manager, because this young girl, I'm helping her, like she's the mother has never flown on an airplane. She looked kind of scared. She said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get through an airport. And I said, well, we're going to have someone go with you. She'll take care of the rental cars and all that. And so my quality control manager is going to go with her. But when the award comes, they're going to both go up on stage and get it because we're so proud of her. And this is really, when it's all said and done, being an engineer really is about just making life better for other people. And we do it for can, each in our own way.
I love that so much. Before this interview, you had written to me, in life, I'm quoting you now, in life, I have found engineering is more than just science, applying technology, or controlling our environment. Engineering is a way of life for helping people find happiness through development of a better character, visualization of goals, development of strategies, utilization of resources, actions for achievement, and feedback for wisdom. And I read that and I thought to myself, wow, that's such an amazing statement. It aligns very well with I couldn't have put it that well, but it resonated with me very deeply. So I just am so grateful that you were willing to spend some time and share your stories and experience with us. I think that you've already answered this question in a few different ways, but I'm going to ask this specifically, and you can share your take on it. What is one thing within the context of your role as an engineer, scientist, manufacturing technologist, whatever you want to call it? What's one thing within the context of that role that brings you joy, and one thing that frustrates you?
Oh, well, maybe I'll answer them in reverse questions so we end up on a good note. The frustrating part maybe is just being patient. Sometimes I feel I know the answer, or I want to get a project done, and there are reasons why you can't. Maybe it's shipping, you can't get your supplies, or maybe it's the weekend, you can't get anybody to work. Or maybe it's a team and others just don't understand and they want to keep discussing it. There's all kinds of reasons, and you just have to be patient and realize that sometimes, like baking a cake, it takes a little while. You can make the battery, put it in the oven, but you got to wait a while for it to rise and cook. And same with ideas. You can plant an idea and you can encourage it, but sometimes you got to wait a while for it to incubate and to grow and finally catch on. And, that's kind of where our program is. When I first started helping people, some of our regular employees said, "Oh, you're wasting our money, you're wasting our time, and why do you do this? And let's just get production out the door." And I said, you gotta think about other people. Some of us have been fortunate, but not everybody's had that kind of background or been born with that kind of talents. And, we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to help each other. And that's where you find the real happiness in life. That's the joy, is helping somebody have a better day because of something you designed, or something you built, or something you're doing. They say we're never as tall as when we bend over to help somebody up. And I still think that's a good philosophy, to stay humble. No matter how clever and smart or educated we think we are, we're really just people. And, we got to remember to be humble. Others appreciate that.
Well, Andy, I was so excited to have you on the show because of the lessons that I thought myself and those listening would learn about manufacturing. And I think we certainly received that. But I think I can say without hesitation that this has been the most uplifting episode that I've recorded. And I just feel like I've learned so much more than just manufacturing and engineering. So thank you so much again for being on the show and sharing some of your background and experiences and wisdom with us. I deeply appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.